Hey everyone, this is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to be breaking down all of the major astrological transits for the month of August. And joining me are Whitney Kranz and Alexandra Blair. You met them last month. They are my new co-hosts, which has been just awesome. We had so much great feedback from all of you and such a warm welcome for Whitney and Alexandra last month. And it's just been really, really nice to have a couple of cool astrologers to work with. So I'm really happy to have them back in the mix for today's forecast. So that will be really nice. Before we get into it, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. We're trying to get to 70,000 subscribers by the fall equinox, and we've been picking up some momentum. So that is great. Thank you to everyone who has helped us, especially if you listen regularly and you haven't yet subscribed. We really appreciate it. You can find transcripts of any of these daily talks on our website, which is nightlightastrology.com. And a couple of things I want to point out on the website. Coming up in August, if you go to the events tab, click on live talks, you will see my next talk on August 22nd is the 8th house, the place of karmic debts. And we're going to talk about this house from the standpoint of its ancient astrological roots and also why we may consider it as a place of karmic debts, for better or worse. This, I think, will help a lot of people also who might have a little anxiety about this house to clarify some of its real meaning. When you register for that talk or any of my monthly webinars, you get the link. And then if you can't attend live for the webinar, you get the recording afterward. You can see some of the other talks that we've done already this year: Outer Planets in Love, Uranus and Gemini, Neptune and Aries, big ingresses for next year. I did a talk on the 12th house, now the 8th. In September, I'm doing a talk on Venus's 12 love languages, looking at the story that Venus tells about our love life through the 12 signs of the zodiac. And in October, I'm giving a talk called The Myth of Astrological Compatibility. This is spicy. What everybody gets wrong about the astrology of relationships. I'm going to give you my perspective on this, having worked with clients on relationship astrology for a long time now. I think there are some things that really work and some things that really don't work. So we'll talk about that, and I hope that you will be able to join us for these talks. On that note, I'm really excited to delve into the astrology of August. Welcome back, Whitney and Alexandra.
Hello. Thanks for having us back.
Yeah, this is so fun. I'm so excited to break down another month of astrology together. People have been contacting me since our last episode, just raving about the two of you. They love you. I think that this is like, you never know. It's like, how will it go? And people just loved it. So I'm really, really happy to be doing it.
That's wonderful. I'm like, are you sure?
This is such a great community. Like Alexandra was mentioning this the other day, we were talking. It's like the people who hang out at Nightlight and I think on this channel are some of the sweetest people out there.
Very special people.
I completely agree. You all are amazing.
Well, we have, I want to make sure, if you haven't yet met Whitney and Alexandra and gotten to know their work, at the end of today's episode, I'm going to tell you more about how you can follow them on Instagram and find their work and book a reading and all that good stuff. So stick around at the end because I want to make sure that you find them online and follow them as well. Today, we are looking at the astrology of August, and I have a good amount of transits to go through. It's interesting this month. They're all clustered together around a few specific little date windows.
They are.
Most of them, like, for example, I think most of them fall right around the full moon of the month. So anyway, there's a lot to talk about. And what I want to do to start off with is the same thing we did last month, which is, well, you know what? Before we even do that, like, how was July? We lived through it. Let's reflect a little bit. What were your highlights? What did you think about July?
Oofda. That's the Minnesotan in me. Oofda. I'm so glad to be done. As a Leo rising, Cancer season obviously is my 12th house. So lots of processing of some shadow work there, right? And I know I specifically had like a really unsettling incident that I shared on social media around the Venus opposite Pluto transit, which is interesting because now looking at the astrology of August, I can kind of see that playing out and hopefully resolving, but maybe I can share a little bit more specifics on that when we get through the month. Alexandra, how was it for you?
Yeah, it was, I mean, my life is built around these tricky Mars transits. I swear everything, like many good things in my life come from these tricky Mars transits. So I had some good stuff happen. But I can't tell you how many clients and friends and people were just like, something's building, what's happening? And I'm like, yeah, some things are going to happen. But it was such a charged month. And I always see these months when I'm doing my year ahead prep. And I every time just forget how the rhetoric and the atmosphere plays a role in how charged it feels. So it's the astro weather is one thing, but everyone talking about it and obsessing about it and diving into it is another. And it felt really at a fever pitch this month. So hopefully, even though August does look like it has some tricky little things going on, hopefully everyone can find their way back to baseline or, de-escalate that a little bit.
Yeah, there was the thing that I noticed from July was the sequence of Mercury, Venus, and the Sun in order opposing Pluto. They were all hitting an actual planetary point in my wife's chart, and I wasn't even thinking about that going into it. And so for her, it was a really big month in a lot of ways. And then remember, for me, I have Uranus on the ascendant. So both of us had like things going on in separate areas of our life. And like, thankfully, they kind of wove in and out of each other. So it was like, I've got your back, now you've got mine. And it was like back and forth. But it was wild. And I feel like the Pluto pieces really told a story. And then for me, the Mars-Uranus dynamic was probably the most impactful. And the craziest thing that happened was when Mars-Uranus came together almost exactly. It was really close to exact. And about 3 a.m, this massive tree fell, and like it was like a house destroying tree size, and it fell and landed like less than 10 yards away from our house and woke me up in the middle of the night, and the winds were really high. So like we went down to the basement or whatever, and I was like, oh my God, isn't it interesting? And I kept thinking about the fact that this is a Mars-Uranus in the sign of a benefic configured to a benefic. And it felt like this near miss was like somehow just touched by Venus a little bit. And like it destroyed our fence. Like we have to spend some money to replace the fence, but that's better than your house. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I was really reflecting on that. I thought that was like crazy. And I wasn't sure. Like I was so cautious driving because of Mars Uranus on my ascendant. I mean, I'm not like Alexandra brought up on social media, like, let's not hide in terror of the transits. And I was like, yeah, totally. And I think I ended up posting something like, use it like if it's gonna rain.
Respectful. I loved that phrase from you.
And I was just riffing off from what Alexandra was saying, and it was funny because I said if it's gonna rain, bring an umbrella. And it was literally that next night that there was a torrential rainstorm and the tree fell 10 feet from our house. And I was like, what kind of umbrella is there for this?
Yeah.
I was like,
oh my God.
But it was a near miss and really like fortunate. But yeah, it was a wild month. And obviously, like in the collective, major shift in the political landscape in the United States with all of these Uranian events activity and Plutonian activity. So it was pretty wild.
I brought that up, Adam, on social media because I just had so many clients and friends and family reaching out being like, should I stay inside all day? Truly asking that. And I totally understand that fear. But so much has to do with our natal placements. And really, you can't know that unless you are studying astrology yourself or you're working with an astrologer. But I actually had a flight booked to New York on July 15th. I'm here staying with my sister for a few weeks. And that was the Mars-Uranus. It was in my 5th. I was flying with my son. I'm in a Venus perfection year. Venus in my chart is in the 8th. So the ruler of the 5th and the 8th. This conjunction was happening in my son's 8th. So I was really looking down the barrel of that gun going, should I change my flight to another day? And then I was like, no, you got to like practice what you preach. I know that Mars brings good things into my life. I know what's real about, my chart. And it's been a great time. It's been a major creative infusion of energy for me, like really fast paced. And my son had really bad diaper rash. So I'm chalking that one up to Mars Uranus in his Mars. He's never had it before. Funny. And I was like, that's got to be that. So, okay.
Fair. It's like, fair enough. And the other thing is that Saffron, who is one of the staffers at Nightlight and leads a portion of our Roots and Spheres monthly moon circle, said this, and it really stood out to me, which is she was like, sometimes the astrology doesn't impact you, but you see it impacting the life of someone else. And she was like, she was talking about driving cautiously and seeing an accident at the intersection not far ahead of her, and just being like, knowing in her heart that those people probably had it closer at work in their natal chart in a really difficult way, and just being like, everyone, bless everyone, hope everyone's okay. And like, it is something when you know astrology too, when it's not necessarily hitting you, but you might see it in the life of a friend or family member or something else.
Or the collective.
Or the collective, right? I mean, there's that.
That's been funny. Big.
I had a friend of mine, Venus opposite Pluto. He calls me up and he's like, going through real hell in his marriage. Like, and this is like someone that I just never would have thought. And then it was like Venus opposite Pluto. And I was like, and that transit ended up for me mostly being about holding some space for him. So I noticed like sometimes it's like that too in these big months. You may notice it in someone else's life too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you guys ready to turn the page and start looking at August?
Let's get into it.
Yeah, let's do it. We're going to put the real-time clock up in a second, and we will go through all of the transits in order and speak to each of them and hopefully add some useful thoughts for each date on the calendar. But let's start with big themes or big transits. Let's hear from each of us a little bit, a big theme that stands out to you and maybe one transit that really stands out to you. And obviously, we're all going to have slightly different takes, but this is at least to gather some thoughts on what might really stand out to different people listening to this, Either of you can start. Who wants to go first?
Don't everyone jump in.
I'll go first. Okay. I think the interesting thing to me about this month is that it's Leo season, except it's like we're all waiting to see The Lion King on Broadway, but the curtain opens and it's like not The Lion King. We're actually watching the Mutable jesters making bad jokes all month, and there's very little Leo happening this month. Sorry, Leo people. There's a bunch of weird contortion acts going on from the mutable signs. There's an opposition, the square. At some point, the moon steps in that snare and hits, and it's just a grand cross around the 14th of the month. So it's just like tricky, interesting astrology. It definitely feels different from last month. In this month, it feels more like adapting, moving, bending. Another image that kept coming up for me is like a rat, like displacing its rib cage to squeeze under the door.
There's going to be some of that written down too. Yeah. That's so interesting.
Okay, the rats are speaking to us through the collective unconscious this month, but those things stood out. I agree with you, Adam. There's a few key dates this month: the new moon, the full moon, the Mars, Jupiter. And I think for me, the more exciting transit that I am just looking at is that Mars, Jupiter in Gemini.
Which happens almost at the exact same time that we have the Jupiter Saturn square too. So it's such a, like that moment is wrapped up in a couple of things at once.
That's really and on that day, the moon is in Sagittarius. So it is literally a mutable grand cross. Yeah.
We'll make sure we highlight that as we get around to the 14th or so. What do you think, Whitney?
Yeah, so looking at the astrology of this month, I'll lead with my transit of the month because maybe that will color the theme for me. So my transit of the month is this Jupiter square Saturn that happens really during this entire full moon dynamic. And so to me, the theme of the month, especially within a Leo new moon and an Aquarius full moon, it's like a breakthrough of purpose that requires us to take responsibility and act for the greater good. Now, I can be a little bit of a glass half full kind of gal, which I don't really want to change, right? But this can also feel like pushing the boundaries, right, to act through that cause. And so like the Leo Aquarius dynamic, as a as Adam says, a card-carrying member of the Leo Rising Club, and an Aquarius sun, I'm really familiar with this dynamic that is like self as part of whole. And I totally get what you mean too, Alexandra. Like all of these little ratty, strange things happening all around that kind of complicate matters. And I feel like we have this purpose and drive forward on the positive side, but those little icky rat race things, it's almost like an undercurrent, right? So that's where I'm coming from. I guess the why behind the Jupiter Saturn as my highlight transit is that the full moon is ruled by Saturn, right? And with Saturn also, squaring Mars while opposing Venus, it's weighty, right? And it lasts. This is a slower moving transit, right? So it lasts for a large portion of the month. Basically, I think it's like August 6th throughout the end of the month. So very, very interesting. I think, as we're talking about, like, there's also a mercurial dynamic too, because Saturn is aspecting those planets in Mercury signs, right? And we have a full Mercury retrograde cycle with Mercury becoming Cazimi. So there's a lot happening here.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I keep looking at the same, most of the month features a lot of movement through Virgo, Gemini, and Pisces, all double-bodied signs. And when you think of what a double-bodied sign is, it is the transitional space between a quality of light that characterizes part of the year. So, when you're thinking about Virgo, you're thinking about the transition between the light and the dark half of the year. With Gemini, it's a little trickier. You're thinking of the transition between the rising and falling of light on the light half of the year. When you're thinking about Pisces, you're thinking about the transition to the light half of the year from the dark half of the year. So all of these transitional spaces communicating with one another, to me, during a Mercury retrograde month, where, Mercury's starting off in double-bodied Virgo. Mercury is hence the ruler of also Venus and Virgo, and Mars and Jupiter and Gemini. I get the feeling that this is a month of installing new systems, but the process of installation might be happening through various things that aren't working or are breaking down and making it very apparent that there's some shift that needs to be made. It's sort of like, I was just reflecting on this because we had a bunch of appliances break down. And it's funny how, with appliances, at least in my experience, it's always like it gets replaced because it breaks apart. Like you don't get a new one. Most of the time we don't get a new one because we're like, let's get ahead. We've had it for 8 years and it's only supposed to be good for 9. So we might as well get one now. Like nobody thinks that way.
No one ever.
Yeah. It breaks and then you're like, shoot, we have to get a new one. I feel like there's there's some signaling of things breaking down and falling apart. But luckily there's a lot of inventiveness and maybe some exciting new ideas that can come pretty quickly to the rescue. But I feel like it's a real transitional space. And Jupiter, Saturn in general speaks to the need for the revision and reimagining or rebirthing of various structures in our lives. And so I feel like there's a new plan emerging. Like if I think about this from the standpoint of the American political landscape right now, regardless of where people are politically, the Democratic Party is having to completely reorganize its strategy for the election during a month that looks like this. That makes sense to me. It makes sense that there would be the quick, rapid implementation of new strategies and approaches and messaging and blah, blah, blah. And also some of it may have to come really quickly because you try something and realize very quickly that's not going to work. So we got to reorganize and do something different. So that I kind of see as a metaphor for what many people might be going through personally, a kind of revising of various platforms, approaches, strategies, and structures. The breakdown part of it might necessitate the change, but there's also a lot of good energy for revision and reordering, and a lot of excitement with Mars Jupiter that's like, let's do it, let's rebuild this thing. So that's kind of what I see in general. But I'd say the big transit for the month for me is the full moon, because the full moon, it's 1 day off from Mercury squaring Uranus. And then immediately there's like this Mercury cazimi, Mercury square Uranus, and then the moon and sun both squaring Uranus at the time of the full moon, right around all of these other transits. So I see the full moon kind of just as a nexus of activity that probably is, I would imagine, would be the busiest time of the month. Yeah. What do you guys think?
It's going to be busy. That's for sure. Don't we have, like, on that, I think the full moon is the 19th, right? And I think on the full moon, the day of the full moon, like every planet is activated except maybe Pluto, which is probably a blessing, right?
Yeah. And if you go like the 16th through the 19th, you've got Mars square Uranus, Mercury square Uranus, Mercury cazimi, Venus square Jupiter, Venus opposite Saturn, Sun square Uranus, full moon in Aquarius hitting off from Uranus, Jupiter square Saturn. Like, that's like 3 days.
I know.
And it's like sweating, and I don't know if it's the sunshine or it's all 12 of those transits in the space of 40 hours.
A lot of big energy.
Yeah.
And like 2 big back-to-back Saturnian moons is just a lot.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's go ahead. We're going to pull up the real-time clock, and we're going to start now and just move through. We're going to put these things into a vacuum. Sometimes we'll zoom out and try to recontextualize things in the bigger picture of the month. But let's start off with this August 2nd. We have Venus in Leo. It'll be earlier in the day from what you see here. This is just a touch after it perfects. Venus is squaring Uranus. I want to mention that, of course, just days prior to this, Venus appears as the evening star. So this is like Venus coming on stage in like a whole new outfit that she's fashioned from her trip through the underworld. And now she's squaring Uranus. And one of the first things that comes to my mind is that this has the feeling of like a new aesthetic, a new appearance, something Venusian that's sort of shocking and provocative and unexpected, but also something that might have been in the works for a while now.
We could use like the peacock metaphor here, right? This is like a peacock shaking out his tail, and
yeah,
here I am.
For sure. Yeah. I think it makes a good, like, you can go ahead, Alexandra.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, I think it's kind of interesting because Venus in Leo is typically a kind of acute time, but Venus has been under the beams and then it finally emerges just to go into Virgo. And even then we're like, okay, being hosted by Mercury, but then Mercury goes, gotta go. I forgot something in Leo. And so I think this complicates things a little bit. And for me, it was pulling up some of the themes that I think might be coming up for a whole generation of living people that we have who are having a Pluto opposition, which is kind of rare. And it had me thinking a lot about celebrity culture and how that kind of flourished and blossomed and came into fruition through sort of like the baby boomers. I think the dates are 1937 through 1958 for Pluto and Leo. And I wonder if over this transit of Pluto and Aquarius, we're going to be getting some reckoning about celebrity culture and influencer culture and some of that stuff coming up. So I was thinking about that because of Venus.
Interesting. Yeah, that is really interesting. And I feel like there's a video I made. What did I make it? I made it like, this is the Venus Uranus square, and I already made a video for that week of content. One of the things I said in the video, which you guys will see, I guess, in another week, was basically like, what I think a lot of the times we think that beauty and the interest in pleasure are values lower than morality or virtue. Like in the ancient world, truth, beauty, justice, harmony were all interconnected aspects of reality, which is why there's such a tighter connection in, say, the Renaissance, which harkens back to the Greek world, between like painting, music, and philosophy. They're not like disconnected fields of study. They're interpenetrating and interconnected. And I feel like one of the things that this emphasizes is especially in the sign of Leo, your life purpose and your self-worth are tied to what is beautiful and enjoyable as much as, or at least as importantly as, any sense of how good or noble or virtuous your life path is, which is like also really important. But there's some sense of like, well, and if your life isn't aesthetically pleasing, enjoyable, beautiful to you as you're living it, like, what's it worth? So that was something I was reflecting on. And I just think, I wonder, there's lots of different ways that Venus and Uranus can present, but that was one that was kind of coming to my mind.
Oh, 100%. And this is why I love being a student, right? Because I don't know everything, and every little experience layers these insights on. And I didn't even realize until, was it earlier this week or last week, at least at the time of recording, that, you know, in your daily podcast, Adam, you're talking about Venus coming in as the evening star and how this ties back to the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, right? In Taurus. And I just think that's so interesting that we get to carry that through. And so, you know, you said like purpose, right? And it feels almost like it could be an epiphany there, right? Mm. Like it's like a rainbow after a storm. And so, you know, while this month is, you know, could be a little intimidating, we've talked about, right, for the whole like midpoint of the month, like, I don't hate how it's starting. you said it, Alexandra. It feels like, I don't know, Venus moving into Virgo here in what, a day or so. It's a little cute.
Oh. Yeah, I think I was thinking about that this month too, because I've been posting some things on Instagram about art and different ways that different art forms can speak to things. We think about learning as being this deliverance of a oral sermon or a written word, but there's really a lot of nonverbal or sometimes pre-verbal ways to understand emotions, transits, astrology, anything. And so Venus contacting that Uranus and Taurus to me kind of also has that sense of like revelation, maybe from some beautiful art, or like crying after you see an opera, or standing in front of a beautiful painting that you'd never seen before that just kind of stops you in your tracks.
I love that. I was just, again, in the same video I was making, I was talking about how there are different ways of pursuing truth. And one of them is like, you have a question in mind, and then you go seeking answers from what wise people have said, or maybe masters in a subject area have said. And then I was really thinking a lot about Jerry Garcia, and I read his biography recently, and some of the things he said about creativity that were standing out to me. And like, one of the things that I really appreciated from his biography, there was like a quote from an interview or something, and he was talking about how when you follow a creative impulse, and he was talking about playing guitar, but I think this could be any kind of creative endeavor, that when you follow a creative impulse without any sense of like where it's going, or, you know, trying to control it, you just follow it, that it will answer so many questions that you've had that are like in queue somewhere in your brain.
Absolutely.
And, you know, he was saying, so like that for him was this really valuable way of going about pondering the questions of life, was like, oh, I just listen to the music and the music tells me, and I just follow the creative impulse of my guitar, and somehow that answers a lot of questions for me. And I was like, that's really cool. That feels very Venus Uranus too.
Well, and Absolutely. Doesn't that come through in just like the music of the Grateful Dead? Oh, I just feel that.
yeah, totally. Yeah. It's funny, like, yeah, John Mayer was in an interview and he was talking like, what do you think about, like, you've tried to basically replace the lead guitar in the Grateful Dead and Dead and Company, and like, what do you think about Jerry's playing? How would you describe it? And he was like, he was never contrived in the way he played. He was always flitting about like a bird. That was the thing he said in the interview that really stood out to me. And so it's funny because we've talked about the peacock here too, and I feel like there's this Venus appearing in the evening with Uranus feels like she's taking flight as well, like she's rising up as some kind of dazzling evening bird. So I don't know, just imagery that comes to mind as well. Well, right after this we have the new moon in Leo, August 4th. We're going to put them together right here. Venus is culminating in Leo at the 29th degree at the time of the new moon, still within that 3-degree separation of Uranus. It's interesting that Mercury is stationing to turn retrograde at the time of the new moon, and that Venus will shortly enter Virgo, go into her fall. This happens on August 4th as well. Venus will enter Virgo, go into her fall, and Mercury will turn retrograde all in the same day. That's a pretty fantastic sequence. What do you guys think about that? Or what stands out to you about that combination of events?
Isn't that so interesting? You know, a new moon in Leo, I think this is where that epiphany we just may have had, right, with this peacock feather happening. This is where we have this like sense of purpose coming in. Like Leo is so incredibly courageous and heart-centered, right? And doing it for a noble cause, right? Maybe a little self-glorification there too. But hopefully with
says the Aquarius. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, right, but this is what I was just going to say, because with the Aquarius full moon, this is where I'm feeling this, like it's for a noble purpose and it's not just for me, it's for the greater good, right? And so with like, here's Venus entering Virgo and Mercury stationing retrograde, basically right on top of the new moon. And so does it feel like we are being able to see a way to possibly plot our path forward while understanding where we've been?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I have a personal planetary stellium in Leo, so I like to think of Leos as being quite generous. That's one of the things I think about the sign. Like when a Leo is feeling fed, everyone around them is also eating, and there's like a sense of bounty and generosity of the Leo kind of part of the world. But especially once Venus enters Virgo, now we have both benefics imperiled in different ways, and they're being aspected by the malefics through the malefics' preferred aspects. So there's a sense of being stingy and not exactly being able to express that generosity. That is sort of interesting, and I feel like that's playing out. Of course, also Mercury stationing and then ruling all of that is kind of another tricky little element there.
Yeah. One of the things that comes to my mind here along the same lines, Alexandra, is we have this new moon in Leo, and I think of that as a very purpose-driven new moon, just because that's... Oh, that's funny.
Siri didn't understand your purpose-driven moon.
My phone
Siri's
thought I was
a Leo. Confirmed.
This is why I put mine on Do Not Disturb.
No, I just turned mine off. Sorry, guys. You know, the weirdest thing about that is that, like, I've never talked to my phone before. Like, I don't have that. I don't use that feature. So weird. Sorry, I don't understand that purpose. So I mean, to me, this is a new moon that says, you know, what am I living for? What, like, concern over legacy and purpose and the pride that we take in having a sense of relevance and importance in life. And there's something being amplified about that. I feel like, given that there's some emphasis on that, and then we see these other events contextually, like right around it, the thing that comes to my mind is, especially because Venus was just in Leo squaring Uranus, there's maybe a way in which we are trying to increase the sense of our own value. Or we're trying to amplify or deepen or intensify our sense of purpose. It's like when Venus is involved with Uranus and we see the new moon in Leo, I think, yeah, like you need to feel special, but it also is like, how am I packaging the specialness, or like what form does my purpose take? because Venus is very concerned with how things look and how things appear and whether things are satisfying or enjoyable or not. And I just really wonder if we're realizing that we're hitting a point of dissatisfaction. It's like, no, I don't like how this looks. Or maybe I'm discovering that my purpose needs a makeover or something like that. You know, it needs like the packaging needs to change somehow. And then Venus pops into Virgo, where Mercury is very glad to meet her in the retrograde. And it feels to me almost like if you were to invite someone to sit down and critique your wardrobe, you know, like a fashion expert, I think that might hurt your feelings at first. You know, like it might hurt my feelings.
If they're a good stylist,
right?
Speaking from a former,
right? If you're good at it, you could constructively criticize while building something new that feels exciting. And that's kind of what I'm feeling is like with regard to purpose, we're having to deconstruct and make over. And there's some constructive feedback that it could like injure your pride or your ego a little bit. And it might even feel like you're having to go backward in some way. But if you stick with it, this feedback is invaluable and may in time enhance your sense of importance and relevance and purpose. And it might make you feel even better about yourself, but it's not necessarily a fun makeover. That's kind of those are the images that pop into my head.
Sure. I feel that 100%. In fact, one of the images when I was preparing for this that popped into my head, it's like, you know, Venus is entering her fall here, right? And she's getting kind of irritated by all the specifics, but like Mercury is here to meet her. Like she just wants to be free to luxuriate. And here's Mercury like, okay, but we have to check our potions and weigh the scales and let's do the math and be right. Like, so there's definitely that dynamic there that feels like, I love that sort of stylist metaphor too. That's fun.
Well, they come together on August 7th. There it is right there. So you can see it.
Yeah, that really feels like a little kiss on the way out the door. Like, don't make a mess. I'll be back. But I do think it's interesting what you're talking about. You know, there's something, that feeling of like there's something wrong about the purpose. And I think Venus is concerned about the beauty and the context and that the harmony of it. And I think Mercury is like, wait, there are some details too. That feels especially loud to me considering Jupiter and Gemini and Venus and Virgo. It's like there's also some details that we missed. We had some big ideas and we put them out there and kind of all of it needs a makeover. It feels very much like a second or third draft of an idea. It's like we could improve this, we can improve that. Mercury is going to run back. I got to grab something, got to get supercharged by the sun, and then I'll be back to handle the rest of it. I think I wanted to just point out that Mercury retrograde is going from Virgo to Leo, and later this year, from December 6th this year till February 23rd of next year, there will be a Mars retrograde that starts in Leo and goes to Cancer. So those two planetary retrogrades don't touch each other, but they sort of touch different parts of Leo. And that felt significant to me because it just feels like this Leo part of the chart doesn't get a real full kind of Leo season. We've got like a little bit of Mars thinking about a little bit of it. We've got a little bit of Mercury thinking about a little bit of it. And when I pulled up the calendar, it does look like in August 2026 and August 2027, there's 2 total solar eclipses happening in Leo. So for me, this kind of feels like that maybe like some skin shedding or some discomfort happening and some weirdness and not totally making sense of a narrative that is going to be really lit up by these eclipses in the next couple years. So if it doesn't totally make sense for you in your chart in the Leo area, maybe consider those timings.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a really good point. Yeah, I wasn't thinking about that. Not putting so much of the future context of the eclipses together, but it's true that the eclipses also speaking to this Mercury retrograde in Virgo. It's interesting to consider that there's an emphasis on that sign right now, and the next series of eclipses will also land in Virgo and Pisces. So there's this may also foreshadow those Virgo eclipses too. That's fascinating. I look at this meeting of these two planets. And I also think whatever Venus and Uranus cooked up in their revolutionary flashpoint, with whatever messaging was in the peacock tail, whatever it was asking for or showing or whatever, it's as though it immediately creates the need for a kind of revision or some kind of editing or breakdown or shift of plans. I think, for example, of like, let's just say that all of a sudden something creates within you the inspiration to start painting. And then immediately you go, well, I'm going to need a space to paint. And then before the actual painting occurs, you take some room that's not being used in your basement and you transform it into a place where you can paint. I feel like that's another kind of image that comes to my mind in terms of, hey, there's this Venusian revolution, but before we can get there, we have to meticulously reorganize and create space for the kind of change that Venus and Uranus just presented us with.
We got to clear out your closet, get all the old stuff out of there to make room for the new wardrobe.
I think this is actually kind of a good time for that, especially with the moon contacting in some way Neptune before it moves into Venus's, sign of Libra. Like that could be a kind of a good time, because if you wait and we get to Mars Jupiter, it's going to be like buying the domain name before you even make a product, printing business cards for a business that isn't incorporated. It's going to be more so that vibe.
I hope you're not calling me out.
Very much calling myself out on that one too. So
I'm just kidding.
I would watch for this day to also feature some important forms of communication. Like, what emails are you getting on August 7th? What are you saying? What are you communicating? What's coming up as conversational topics in your relationships? These will probably be reflective of the deeper changes at work within some of the earlier transits of the month. It's like now we're things are coming together to the point where we're going to have a conversation about what's going on. From this point, I'm jumping forward here to about the 14th of the month. On the 14th, we have Mars conjoining Jupiter. And here we go. So I'm just going to tell you right now, I feel like this transit is very exciting and dynamic when it comes to like mental ingenuity, and like if you want to put pedal to metal with ideas and learning and thoughts and communication and technology, like I love this. I also feel like this is like I'm gonna be stuck. I take my little sauna after I work out at the gym, at the fitness center or whatever. I'm gonna be stuck in there with someone who is like a fast talking sleazeball who is totally high in himself, who won't shut up, and I'm going to be stuck because Mars is with Jupiter and Gemini.
This big shot, tough guy. I literally have these things written down here, right? It's like this is like the jock.
Yeah, I feel like that, and especially with Mars and Gemini, like he's probably trying to sell me a car, like something. No, I'm just playing, but yeah, I feel like this is an exciting transit when it comes to anything that requires strength, determination, courage, momentum, perseverance, and a combination of like mental dexterity and like smarts. So I think it's kind of cool. But what do you guys think about this one?
Yeah, this was my like transit of the month. So I have a couple things. I was thinking about it and I found some fabulous performers. Like Aretha Franklin has a Mars, Jupiter, and Gemini conjunction. Josephine Baker has a Mars, Jupiter conjunction in Gemini. And I was like, those two, just that like bold, expressive action and speech, and even just their art and their music and their work. So that was cool. I also was thinking about, I found that stick with me here, the pyramid in front of the Louvre was actually inaugurated within like a week of a Mars, Jupiter, and Gemini. And the chart of France's incorporation has Mars at 0 Gemini. So I think that is such a perfect example, because the Louvre pyramid was like, they put out there for architects to kind of design something iconic for the Louvre. And immediately people were so upset about this. They were like, why is it a pyramid? Why wasn't it designed by a French architect? This doesn't make any sense. Why is it so modern? Everything in the Louvre is from the Renaissance. Like all of the details were wrong in a way. And somehow it has become one of the most iconic images we all have collectively in our heads about France and about the Louvre. Like it was, for me, a really spot on Mars, Jupiter, and Gemini. That was in March of 1989, which was the last time these planets conjoined in Gemini. And there was also the bankruptcy and the strike that caused it of Eastern Airlines, which was like one of the big four airlines in America. So I thought that was kind of on point too. But for me personally, and then I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. This is happening pretty close to my natal sun and Mercury. And I mentioned that I'm in New York this week. I have walked over 100,000 steps. Like I'm a walker. I love walking, but it's like my body's just like more walking, walk another block, walk a mile. You could go to that next playground, take your son there. It'll be cool. It's so loud in my head. And Adam, I just wanted to say that I watched your video about Jupiter and Mars, and I was so struck by that because, to be totally, real, I'm eight months postpartum with my son. And so I'm in that phase where I'm like, okay, I'd love to get back to normal. I love working out. Like, let's get there. And the hormones in my body are just like, no, this is not going to be the time for that. So when I listened to your video, it was like my jaw just dropped because it was such a perfect and potent example of me. I just have to accept that I'm powerless in this situation. I have no power over that. And me walking and working out and doing all these things. If I want to do that stuff, because I'm in New York and I love seeing stuff, sure, I should. But I need to accept that I have no power over these certain outcomes. So just tying that into me, that was such a potent message for me to hear this morning. I laughed and texted multiple friends who had heard me talk about this all week. So
yeah, it's really remarkable. One of the reasons that I was inspired to talk about that is because we've got this building Mars Jupiter dynamic, one of the signatures of which is an enhancement or increase of power. And there's so many different ways we can talk about what power means, healthier, unhealthier versions of it. And yet Saturn has the superior square. Let me just shift dates here a little bit from the Mars conjunction with Jupiter to 2 days later. Mars squares Saturn. And let me just switch that. There we go. This is just coming off the square. And there's a way in which Saturn, I believe, is going to be imposing greater realities, especially with Pisces, ones that are very vast, that feel very big and very much out of our control. And Pisces is such a sign that asks for surrender on some level. But it's like Tai Chi or Qigong. It's like, accept that. And all of a sudden, it's not that you become less than you are. It's not that you're diminished or demoted or squashed. It's that your will now has to flow and move along with currents that are greater than itself. And it actually finds deeper significance and meaning and purpose within those currents. There's some act of surrender, and it feels at times like I think for our ego at times, it feels like it's getting crushed, or that you're irrelevant or you don't matter. And so we want to fight and try to push through. And I think this moment in the month is going to require some amount of compromise or sacrifice or surrender. But that doesn't mean nothing can be done. That doesn't mean everything is over, or that there is no great use of this Mars-Jupiter conjunction either. Jupiter, after all, is the ruler of Saturn and has something to provide Saturn with. So I kept looking at this and going, if we don't start talking about the limitations of power and how far we can take that idea and this other bigger idea of surrender and humility, now we're going to feel even more acutely distressed when Saturn may come up around this time as what feels like a real prohibition,
100%. Yeah. I mean, if Mars Jupiter, right, is like the start the project and do the thing, then Saturn coming in here is like okay, but do it slow and be careful about it and have the discipline, right? And I don't know, something calls to me with this transit that asks, like, if we're trying to start the project or do the thing or reclaim our power, then how do we bring down the walls and eliminate the roadblocks that are preventing that, right? So very, very interesting. I'll just add here that you guys, I chose on this day, without actually understanding that it was this day, to move.
Wow.
Good luck.
I know, seriously, right? I'm like, okay, well, this is a really good, like, nose to the grindstone, like, get her done kind of a transit. So hopefully it'll, like, get done, right? But
are you moving like close to friends or near friends or anything like that?
Okay, so get this. This is all following my Venus opposing Pluto incident. So I had shared a couple weeks ago that we had a scary incident where I found a man on our patio, like under the cover of the patio of the sectional that we have out there, right? And I'm in the city, I'm on the ground floor. I maybe had a false sense of security in this home, right? And so we've put all of this has put into place now. We're staying in the same place. We're literally moving in the same building. We're just moving 10 floors up because we love it here. But this is a way that we like reclaim our security, right? So I just think it's really fitting. And when I was looking at this, I was like, okay, well, I didn't do that intentionally, but I guess the astrologer in me is really trying to work with the energies here.
Yeah.
At least it's a good time for an ending.
That's very Venus Pluto, by the way. That's the shocking, like that whole story that you shared was a very vivid expression of Venus opposite Pluto.
Crazy. Yeah. And at the end, you're going to plug my IG so all of you can go listen to my sorry.
It's worth hearing. It was like the full story on Instagram is worth going and listening to. There was a lot of stories that came up around that one, as I was mentioning earlier, like with my friend, and I was like, whoa. I think it's really interesting that when I look at this, the other thing that comes to my mind, there's a colleague of mine named Jen Zart. Do you guys know Jen?
Yeah.
So
not personally.
She's cool. She's I think she's now the president of ESAR.
Yeah.
Yeah. So but we have Nightlight in the Kickstarter. For those of you who have contributed, we've given some donations from the Kickstarter to the astrological library that she curates, which is really cool. It's like an attempt to collect and sort of catalog everything that we have as astrologers. And so it's a really cool project we've given to support her. Before she describes Mars, Saturn, when they come into squares and oppositions, as a pressure cooker in which difficult things have to be done often under a lot of pressure, like quickly or rapidly. And I think the double-bodied, the mutable, the Mercury retrograde, everything to me right here screams problem or limit and the need for quick turnabout or solutions and like rapid adjustments. The reason that I also feel like this period looks like that is, I mean, you can see Venus is obviously moving into this configuration with Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn. But also like 2 days after Mars and Saturn hit and create that kind of pressure cooker moment, Mercury squares Uranus. And if there's anything that I think Mercury squaring Uranus could represent at this time that might be really useful, it's that, aha, here's what we could do. Here's how to overcome the problem, or here's the path forward, because Mars and Jupiter are hosted by that Mercury. And Mercury's not only squaring Uranus, but then on the exact same day going through Cazimi. It just feels like they're kind of like, where there's a will, there's a way. Here's some ingenuity. Here's an interesting idea that appears out of nowhere, or a resource, or something that could help us to move through what feels like something that initially came up and felt like a blockage. So that's kind of, I guess, that's a pretty general way of looking at it, but that's one of the things that came to my mind.
Yeah, I had this note that some parts of the month, starting here for sure, feel like the corny super spy moment where they're ducking through the laser beams and you're kind of having to do this moment. I was like, this is what's happening here.
Yeah.
It really feels like that, especially with all the mutable. So it's funny because these are the most flexible parts of us and all of our chart in some ways. They're the places we're used to giving or changing or being comfortable with liminal spaces. And so here we are having these boundaries and things kind of imposed upon us. So it probably feels a little more potent. And I think something interesting about this Mars Saturn square is that this is the opening square. So in April 2024, they can join in Pisces. Because of the Mars retrograde, they won't reach full tension opposition until next August. So it's we're used to having those contacts every 6 months, but we're going to have a whole year for this pressure cooker to build. And when the opposition happens, it will actually happen across cardinal signs because Saturn will be over in Aries. So it's going to build and carry through into a whole new set of dynamics. And that Mercury square is reforming that square from the 21st. So that's just like even more of that touching back pressure cooker revisions. That's tricky.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Here's the moment that we're talking about with Mercury Cazimi and Mercury square to Uranus. Does the Sun and Mercury square to Uranus conjure up any interesting images or thoughts for you, Whitney?
It feels like we were talking about this like lightning strike, right? I had this whole metaphor worked up in my head about how, to me, Mars, Jupiter, which is still definitely in play, right? It feels like power and strength, like the god of thunder, Thor, in Norse mythology, right? And so like then we have this Mercury square Uranus that feels like that lightning strike moment, and because it's happening at the same time as the Mercury Cazimi, I wonder if this is when we get to really declare that sense of purpose that we've been talking about, right? So that's what was coming up for me. I also think it's so interesting, like you mentioned, Alexandra, that this, because Mercury is retrograde, we just experienced this literally at the last full moon. And so there's a story here that's in the works, right?
Yeah.
It is remarkable that I love, first of all, I love the image of like, there's Jupiter and Mars are like Thor, and the Sun, Mercury, and Uranus are like his thunderbolt, like that, there's lightning bolt. That's like, I really love that image. That's a really good one. And it does feel that way. Like there's a lot of potency around this moment, and the feeling of a kind of like an electrical, like a static electricity, that's like it pulls on your hair. Have you ever done that with the balloon? Yeah, it's like, or if you ever shock yourself after you like touch something when you're walking on whatever the substance is, and then you touch something and it shocks. It feels like we're going to be tapping into some things that have a real current to them right around this time. And again, I think it's probably serving in a process that is also distinctly Venusian. I mean, look at what else is happening at the same time. This is like a logjam of transits around this time that we were mentioning. We also have Venus opposite Saturn and Venus square Jupiter on the same day, on the 19th. So, and we have to mention that at the same exact time, we have Jupiter squaring Saturn. So it's just like, well, big arrow came out. There we go.
That's a big one. We got to remember that transit.
Just in time for the full moon.
Talk about Thor, talk about lightning. The arrow's like, I'm mighty.
I'm in.
Has to participate. But I do feel like this is a really significant moment in the month of August. And I don't even know where to begin with it, honestly. You could take the Venus Saturn angle, you take the Jupiter Saturn angle, you take all of them at once. I'll say one thing and then I want to pass it off to you guys and let you talk about maybe Venus Saturn too. To me, Jupiter Saturn dynamics, as I've understood them in historical and mundane astrology, would often refer to the really important moments when well-recognized social establishments, institutions, and structures, whether that's governments or systems of education or religion, like Jupiterian kinds of things, go through a process of crumbling, decay, death. They reach their expiration date somehow, and the need for new life to be breathed into them takes place. They are transitional moments where a lot of, like, again, I would say August is going to be one very clear example of it in the United States right now, is the transition of power, leadership, and approach taking place in the Democratic Party in particular. It's so Jupiter-Uranus. It follows right on the heels of the Jupiter-Saturn, it's so Jupiter-Saturn. This Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius that happened just after the election, in 2020. So I see this as on that storyline, like very clearly connected. But for a lot of us, if you actually look at the whole sign house of Aquarius, where Pluto is at the 0-degree marker, which is where Jupiter and Saturn met in December of 2020, you think about that whole sign house of Aquarius, and you think about that's where the cycle started, and then you look at these two houses and kind of compare and contrast. And these two houses are in some ways connected to the revolution and the revising of structures that began in the house of Aquarius in our charts. That's tricky to synthesize all of that at once. Certainly, we tried to do some of that in our horoscopes for the month in August as well. But I think one way of looking at it, just broadly speaking, is this is like when you take the idea of an institution and you bring it into your personal life. What are the institutions that we have in our personal life? What are the forms of government or organization, or belief systems or structures? What are the paradigms that we live with? And how are they changing? How are they being asked, like, how are our own little inner party platforms changing? Like, how are the leadership structures within us changing? We can use those same ideas and like apply them on an inward level. I do feel like with Venus opposite Saturn at the same time, we could say that there are some significant relational ramifications. These structures are not transforming without having conversations with other people in our lives. That to me feels like one way Venus might be involved. Okay, I want to pass the baton off to you guys. What do you think?
That's so interesting, especially going back to the 0-degree marker of Aquarius. See, these are the things that I don't put together, and that's why I love working with you guys. So yeah, I have to mention, because we're talking about these structures and systems of governance, right? I just think it is so crazy that this day of the full moon, this Monday, August 19th, this is the day that the Democratic National Convention begins. Right? And there's, without getting too political, we can stay totally surface level. I think it's like kind of wild. This is like a party, right? And it's a swanky party. It's Venus, Jupiter. There's riches there. There's opulence there, right? And everybody's going to be like blasting about, ambition and vanity, right? But at basically the same time, we have Saturn opposing Venus. And so, it's a party on the surface, but this is a social burden, right? And people are there, they're self-conscious, there's strained friendliness, right? There's like, okay, this feeling of reel it in. And it's just wild to me. Looking at this, I'm glad that you both felt similarly, that it's hard to understand what 6 of these transits in the span of 12 hours could even mean. But like with the full moon happening on the same day, it feels like something is being shaken loose, right? Like, I don't know. It's very interesting. And I could talk more about Jupiter Saturn here too in the mix, because this Jupiter Saturn, right, lends to more of a feeling of temperance or quality over quantity. And I just can't help but think of all of the just all of the little minute nuances of social interaction taking place at this time, and how we have to take responsibility for what's happening, right? And and from a personal standpoint, like with this new sense of purpose, like how do we take full responsibility for our growth, and does our purpose serve for the good and contribute to society? It's just wild. What do you think, Alexandra? You always have the best insights.
Well, that's nice. I like hearing yours too, of course. But I think something that's interesting for me is that the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter happened, as you mentioned, Adam, at 0 Aquarius, December, I think it was December 21st, 2020. We have Pluto now at 0 Aquarius. And so whatever was launched is now, it's like a even more dedicated dog has its teeth on that transformation. And this opening square really feels like, okay, we said blah, 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 but the details are wrong. Like there's something wrong in the details. We have Venus in fall in Virgo, and we have Jupiter in detriment in Gemini. We have Saturn hitting Venus with Saturn's preferred aspect of the opposition. And then we have Mars in this conjunction there, and then squaring Venus. So it's just like the details are wrong. And that is what is being screamed at me here. It makes me think a little bit about, you mentioned, like our institutions. And I was thinking about in a mundane way, it's kind of like, after an election happens, we're talking about it just because it's happening. It's not my favorite thing to talk about, but here we have to be. People all of a sudden start Googling, what is the Electoral College? Or why doesn't the popular vote win? Like, this is kind of what this is reminding me of. Like, we kind of get the gist of things, but somewhere the details are off. And that's maybe where the work is going to be. And I think this is more relevant because of this Pluto and Aquarius transit it's going to have us be more concerned with institutions and the collective than maybe we otherwise would be. So I think people are going to be getting intimate with details they didn't even know that they needed to know about.
Yeah. I can't help but notice that as Venus is opposing Saturn, she's enclosed. She has a brief period of enclosure. It's not super long, so I'm not, I'm not stressing too much. But the Venus square to Mars on August 22nd, I believe, breaks the enclosure, if I'm not mistaken. Let's just see. So we go forward from
22nd, 10 p.m.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah. So
and then the sun's in Virgo.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There is I feel like again, Venus is going through a lot. I can't help but think of the fact that I have to just point it out. I'm not, you guys, all who watch my channel know that I don't do the politics, but it's so freaking obvious. It's like you can see here that we have a woman who's the strong lead candidate to replace Joe Biden on the Democratic ticket. They have this convention happening, and Venus is all kinds of jacked up. I just feel like that could be a little bit of tough sledding for Kamala. I don't know, and I'm not like, I don't have a stake in it as a content creator on this channel. That's not, but I can't help but notice it's like, this is a rough moment for Venus. And like that has to figure into how this is going to play out in a huge political event in US history that's happening like right now. So I would say watch for that to play out in August as the Democrats are considering all of this. I don't know. I just wanted to point that out but the other thing would be bringing it back into our personal lives. The simple fact here is that this is a tough moment for love, relationships, whether it's self-esteem and like how you feel about your physical body, or just the domain of the sensual in general, and the relational, and the need for harmony and connectedness. It's going through a real rough moment here for a couple of days while the malefics enclose Venus. And I would say this might be one of the harder patches of the month for finding things like compromise or, you know, an agreement or
Grace.
general. Yeah, like, yeah, exactly. It's kind of a harsh moment.
It feels like hurt feelings to me, you
Yes.
know, like,
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I truly wrote, when Venus enters Libra, I wrote, thank the gods, because it's like just gonna be such a breath of relief. She gets a little bit of relief, I think, from the like mutual reception of the sun in Virgo. It's like, okay, at least there's like a favored friend here or something like that. But you had mentioned last month, Adam, that July 15th was like a convergence of timelines. And I feel that way about this 19th date and right around there. This is a part of the month that really impacts everyone differently. Some months we have transits where we're kind of like, oh, I see where the world is going, or I see where the energy is moving. But this month, these are very specific and detailed. And you saw how many arrows there were on the screen at one point. This is going to affect everyone very personally and very differently.
Yeah, it's like sometimes people like in my life who don't know really anything about astrology go like, how do I make sense of what you just said? Because I'm having a hard time with that. I don't really know astro speak. What I would say is like, pay attention to August 16th through the 19th.
Yeah.
Note all of the busy events and themes and just notice what pops up around that time. And you will notice a convergence of like activity and timelines and everything, like Alexandra was just saying. And in a sense, that's astrology. Like,
yeah,
that's sort of all you have to know on the most basic level, you know? And that's kind of what we're doing here, is we're sort of saying like, here's all these ideas about what this might be about or how it might feel. But if you really want to just keep it as basic as possible, just have your journal out and do a lot of reflecting and note taking right around these days, because you'll see there's a lot that's going to pop.
And it will really help if you meet with an astrologer. And I just can't tell you. I mean, I say that all the time. I feel like I sound like a broken record, but even if you put a couple notes, my back really hurt, or like these were those days. We were talking about the grand conjunction or the great conjunction and how that Jupiter Saturn square is tied back to it. So I was looking back. What I do is I go into my photos app and I go back to that date and I look at my photos. I'm like, what the heck was going on in my life in December? Nothing. I'm like, this happened. I mean, I'm a Cap rising, and then I have my chart ruler in Aquarius. Like, this clearly affected me. What do you mean nothing? So I'm looking again through my photos. And in one of my photos, I noticed that I was reading a book, and I kind of thought, what book is that? And it was like one of the most impactful. I mean, it's a book that changed my life. It was like the Poetic Eddas, and it is the reason I am a polytheist now, 4 years later.
Nice.
I went from being an atheist in 2020 to being a polytheist. So I was just going, oh, nothing happened to me. That's so weird. No, just write down in the journal. I don't have access to them because I'm in New York, but take these little notes, especially with some of these more nuanced transits where the Jupiter-Saturn cycle is decades long. You planted some little tiny seed, one little book in a photo, and now, 30 years later, that's going to be something big for me.
Like, I think of the fact, like, I'll give you guys a really simple illustration. Let me just orient this chart for a second so it looks like my natal chart, because this might actually help people out there who know a little bit of astrology, like enough to be dangerous, as they say. Like, if that's you, then this may help. So this is the whole sign house arrangement of my chart, because I'm a Taurus rising. So I had Jupiter and Saturn conjoin at 0 Aquarius in my 10th house in 2020. At that time, we were in the process of hiring our very first staff, and for Nightlight, because it was growing pretty rapidly. And so it was like, oh my God, Jupiter and Saturn, the company is growing. We need to add more support. And so it was a growth of structure and support for the business. That's a very like Jupiter, Saturn in the 10th house. So fast forward to now, and we see that same dynamic playing out in my 2nd and 11th. And 2 of my staff that has since expanded since that time will be visiting me here. In fact, I think it's one of them contacting me right now, being like, where's the notes for this thing? But yeah, so like the Jupiter Saturn dynamic across house 2 and 11 will be taking place as 2 of my staff come and stay with Ashley and I for about a week to do a huge overhaul of our website and our programs and a lot of things that will be implemented in the spring of 2025. So they're going to be here like doing a big kind of like spring cleaning and overhaul of our business operations and setting up a kind of network of support for the student community and so on and so forth. That is a continuation of the Jupiter-Saturn dynamic in my 10th house. Now it has to do with communities and networks we're trying to create, and a reallocation of funds and business strategy in the second house and different technologies we're using. But that's how it's tied together in my chart right now. And if you play with the same thing, look at Aquarius, look at Pisces, look at Gemini, and just kind of connect the dots between, like think of something starting in Aquarius and then think of it continuing across the Pisces Jupiter connection in whole sign houses, and you might get somewhere. You might be able to put together a story that makes a lot of sense pretty quickly. If you're not used to astrological tracking, you could just start with journaling around dates too, and over time you're going to be able to catch more of these big storylines. But yeah, that's how it's working in my chart at the moment.
If you need help, you can shoot Whitney or I a DM. We're available.
Totally. I was
available for readings.
Available for readings. We will point you toward how to book with them, because that's actually a great idea. If you're like looking at this and you go, I want to know how these things are impacting me, there's nothing handier than having an astrologer who won't just tell you, but who will know what questions to ask, because it's also sort of like trying to figure out, like, we usually, astrologers can have a pretty good idea of themes and topics. And then when we ask you just a few questions about what's going on in your life right now, boom, we can just connect some dots and you'll be amazed. And I know that both Whitney and Alexandra can do that for you. Venus trines Uranus on the 27th, and then on the 28th opposes Neptune. It's like, I'm not leaving without some big things to say before I leave. You know, like, I'm not going out the door without a big statement.
Always with the drama.
You know, I do like this though, because it feels like Venus is going to get completely drunk before she gets back to like sensibility in Libra. You know?
She was like lonely and annoyed in Virgo in Mercury's earthy temple. She was like, he left, that's so annoying. Then the sun comes, she's like, let's have a little party, at least we can blow off some steam. And there's that reception happening, so it's like, okay, cool. And then she kind of wanders home barefoot, holding her sandals. I love that.
She's popping the bubbly and getting intoxicated.
I do feel like it's interesting, because what happens the day of Venus's opposition to Neptune is Mercury also turns direct.
Yes.
And then on the very next day, Venus goes into her home sign of Libra, and it's like, my work is done, you know. And I feel like, all jokes aside, I do feel as though this is a month that subtly is all about Venus going through a really big transition again, you know. And I feel like the connection with Uranus in a trine, even in opposition with Neptune, doesn't bother me so much for Venus, because Venus and Neptune like to hang out. Like, they're pretty good together. Yeah. So I feel like this could be kind of healing and releasing, and kind of letting go of some of the grittier, harder work that came all the way up through the opposition with Saturn earlier in the month.
Or like, has this all just been a dream? Like, can we just move on now?
Yeah, totally. And then, I mean, right away though, she's, I feel like once we get to the 29th and she goes into the trine with Pluto, it's like, she means business. Like, once she enters, I feel like that's substantial. And it's like, she's ready to go. There was a crucible, and now she's taken something from it and immediately is ready to contribute something.
Do some work about it. Yeah. There's like some life-giving primal force behind her entrance to Libra. Yeah, and she's in the superior position and in her domicile. So it's just like, okay, let's get something done. You had a video called "A Venusian Pressure is Building," and I literally feel like this is the end of that. Yeah, absolutely. It didn't end until August 29th is when it ends.
If I had to technically push it forward, I would push it forward to its crossing the South Node.
Yep. And then Pluto goes back into Capricorn. So then it's like fully off. Yeah. September 4th.
Yeah. That's a good day. And of course, in September, we'll have loads to talk about because we're getting into eclipse season, and Mars will be in Cancer. And
Love
like
eclipses.
Pluto back into Capricorn.
And Alexandra said this like a time or two, or no, it was like, we've only done it one other time. So it was like the last time we met, Alexandra said, and to think, we're not even close to all of the astrology of 2025, which is like, really crazy.
We're going to have to start shooting for 2-hour episodes in 2025.
Yeah.
It's a good thing you brought us on, Adam.
I agree. You guys are fantastic. And it's so much more fun to have a conversation about it. And I think for viewers too, I imagine that all of you enjoy hearing different perspectives. And like, it's like we used to have an air popper for popcorn rather than microwave popcorn. It would like spin and then it would start popping out. It feels a bit like that. Like we get going and things are spinning, and then all of a sudden, like all these images and ideas and thoughts and themes just start popping out. And then you guys can add butter and salt.
That's the natal chart.
Yeah, exactly. Anything you guys want to add before we close shop for the month?
I don't think so. I think
work.
Yeah, sorry, Leos. 2026, 2027, you'll get those solar eclipses, but no Leo season this year.
Yeah, it is a little brief. I feel like it's almost like a movie where the king, or how like I can't think of an exact title, but there's often movies where the king has to become part of some kind of errand or mission where he has to join with like the common folk, or where it's almost like you're gonna be the king, but you're gonna go into hiding, or you're gonna dress like street people and go out and do something.
Yeah.
And you're gonna be a part of the world, and you don't lose your crown, but this is gonna be educational for you. It feels like a little bit like that.
Totally. I really do see that.
I know there's a movie like that. I just can't think of what it's like.
It's tying me back to the Stoics. I think many a Stoic, an eminent Stoic, had a fun little hobby of being a faux peasant flaneur and walking around and learning the important lessons on sandalfoot. So
what comes to my mind is of course it was a love story, but like, remember Aladdin, where Jasmine just really wants to go and leave the palace, and like it's
that ties into Venus.
Yeah, it does a little bit, doesn't it? Well, something like that anyway, where I feel like Leo is like, the moon starts off with me, and then it's like, wait, where did everybody go? Like, where are we going? And there might be some, like, the word humility comes to mind this month. Like that there may be some.
I think that makes sense because a lot of these Leo transits are the first occurring opposite Pluto in Aquarius, and I just keep thinking about I have a number of clients who are in like a Pluto opposition. I'm like, we get to figure out what that means together, basically. That's very special.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And on that note, let me point you to the fantastic work that Whitney and Alexandra do with their clients so that you can connect with them. So Whitney is going to be on Instagram at astro.arcana.astrology, and her website, and I highly recommend you follow her and go listen to her Venus Pluto story. That was a good one. And you can find Whitney at astroarcana.com, where you can book a reading. And so do that, because Whitney can help you unpack some of the transits of the month or of the next couple of months, or maybe some of the bigger outer planetary transits that are coming down the road for you. For Alexandra, you can find her on Instagram at 9 Lives Astrology. And again, I also highly recommend following her. One of the things that she did last month for Venus Pluto was shared a string of, I think it was a reel that you did, where you shared a string of images and artwork that were really just evoking the transit and being like, for your consideration, Venus Pluto. And you made connections to, I think, some of the artists who actually had Venus Pluto like in their charts, or actors and actresses and so forth. So I just feel like the way you cover astrology. Yeah, that too.
The Spotify playlist. I love that, Alexandra. More,
guys.
Yeah,
we actually a friend of mine and I are hosting an event. Can I talk about that for a
Yes,
second?
please do.
Okay.
Can we find it on your website,
It is.
ninelivesastrology.com?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's on my website. A friend who is a shamanic practitioner, she's done just like tens of thousands of hours of journeying. We're hosting a couple shamanic journeys themed around transits. So they're not necessarily like the most beautiful transits of the month. Some of them may be difficult, but it's kind of for people who are looking to get a little hardcore embodied knowledge of the transits. So one is the Mars Jupiter conjunction. We're going to do a shamanic journey around that time. We've got one happening on that Mercury Cazimi, and then I think one on the full moon. And we did a couple last month around the Pluto transits, and multiple people like had an experience with a purple aura snarky deity that I'm like, is Pluto a snarky purple guy? I guess maybe. So check that out. That's on my Instagram and on my website.
Oh my gosh, that's great. Yeah, you can book a reading there too, right? At ninelivesastrology.com.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Both of you, I hope, will get some opportunities for readings this next month, because I know that like right now I'm not doing readings. We have a couple of staffers at Nightlight who do readings, but it's been really nice to be able to refer people to some astrologers while I'm taking a break from client work at the moment. So I really recommend checking it out. And, and I think you guys are probably willing to tailor a reading to other things people would want to talk about as well.
Absolutely. 100%. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you all for listening. I hope this was enjoyable, entertaining, interesting, and that also it has that wonderful effect of generating your own images and thoughts, and listen to your own instinct, obviously, as well. And take out your journal around these dates. It's one of the best ways to get even more out of a forecast like this, is to track around those dates that we mentioned. If you have stories to share also, you can email them to us, grabbed@nightlightastrology.com. If you have a transit story from any of the transits that we discussed on the show, we are going to start aggregating some of them and actually sharing some of your stories in future episodes, so that we start off the episode saying, how was the previous month, like we did today? And we'll say, oh, look, Melissa had this crazy thing happen at work, or, like whatever. So, Melissa, you have to, you got to share your story.
Can't wait to share it.
I know. You can use in the comment section of this episode, you can use the hashtag grabbed and then tell us your story, or grabbed@nightlightastrology.com. The reason that we use the word grabbed, which strikes some people as funny, Indian astrologers use the word graha to describe a planet, and that word actually means grabber as well as to grasp. There's a way in which the planets sort of grab us and we're like, whoa, I just got grabbed by a planet. And then there's a way in which, because we had an encounter with a planet and we reflect on it through astrology, we grasp something. So if you want to share an insight you learned as well as the experience, or if you just want to share the wild experience, we invite all of it and are excited to share your stories in future episodes. All right, so we'll leave it there. And thanks again to both Whitney and Alexandra, and we will see you all next month. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.